Snow falls. A train stops. One locked compartment. One perfect shot. Cut to Miss Jane Marple, knitting in silence, watches 5 strangers on the Nordic Star to Oslo. A colonel hiding old debts. A widow knitting scarlet secrets. A doctor chasing a fortune in radium. A salesman with a pistol in his samples. At 2 a.m., the blizzard swallows sound. A cigarette melts a peephole in frost. A bullet finds its mark. The door is bolted from inside. No gun. A forged note for 50,000 kroner. But Miss Marple sees the stitch that doesn't belong. 7 chapters. 1 murder. 0 escape. Murder on the Snowbound Express to Oslo. The classic Christie puzzle begins now. Chapter 1. The Nordic Star. The Nordic Star left Bergen at 3:30 on a February afternoon that had already surrendered to dusk. Snow, fine as salt, drifted across the platform and melted on the warm brass of the handrails. Miss Jane Marple, standing beside her small pigskin suitcase, watched the last porter swing aboard and felt the familiar tug of departure. Not excitement precisely, but the mild curiosity that attends the beginning of a new piece of knitting. She had come north on the recommendation of her nephew Raymond, who wrote novels and believed fresh air cured everything from rheumatism to writer's block. A week on the coastal steamer, Aunt Jane, then the mountain railway to Oslo. You'll see fjords, glaciers, and quite possibly the Northern Lights. Miss Marple had agreed because the alternative was another winter in Danemouth, listening to the vicar's wife complain about the price of coal. A steward in bottle green livery relieved her of the suitcase and led her through the train. The Nordic Star was new, built for tourists who wished to travel in the manner of royalty without the inconvenience of actually being royal. The corridors were narrow but panelled in pale birch. The lamps gave a steady electric glow. The carpet, thick enough to muffle a regiment, bore a pattern of stylized snowflakes. Miss Marple's compartment, number 5, was at the rear of the first-class coach. It contained a seat that became a bed, a folding table, a wash basin disguised as a mahogany cabinet, and a window already rimed at the edges. She arranged her travelling rug, her library book, a treatise on Norwegian church architecture, and a paper bag of peppermint humbugs, then went in search of tea. The dining car lay 2 coaches forward. It was half empty, the tables laid with heavy white linen and silver that carried the crest of the Norwegian state railways. A waiter with the solemn face of a bishop seated her beside the window. Outside, the harbour lights of Bergen slid away. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and warm bread. Across the narrow aisle sat Colonel Armitage upright as a ramrod, moustache trimmed to the millimetre. He was reading the Times, folding it with the precision of a man who has folded maps under fire. His wife opposite him wore a travelling costume of violet velvet and a necklace of diamonds that flashed whenever she lifted her cup. She was telling the colonel, loudly enough for the next table to hear, that the pearls she had intended to wear were still at the bank in Cheltenham. At the far end of the car, Fru Larsen knitted. She was a square, comfortable woman in black, with a face like a well-kept apple, and steel-rimmed spectacles that caught the light whenever her needles moved. The wool was scarlet, violent against the white tablecloth, and the garment, scarf or shawl, it was impossible to tell, grew with astonishing speed. Mr. Felix Dunn occupied a table alone. He was small, neat, with a bowler hat on the seat beside him and a sample case at his feet. Every so often he took out a bottle, held it to the light, and made a note in a pocket-book. Patent medicines, Miss Marple decided. The labels were too colourful for wine. The door at the forward end opened, admitting a draught and a tall man in a dark overcoat. He removed his hat, revealing hair the colour of wet ash, and spoke to the steward in fluent Norwegian. The steward bowed, consulted a list, and led him to the table next to Miss Marple. "Dr. Quist," he introduced himself, clicking his heels in the continental fashion. "I join at the last moment. Lectures in Oslo, postponed by the snow, fortunately." His English was perfect, with only the faintest trace of an accent, as though he had learned the language from textbooks, and then polished it in laboratories. Miss Marple inclined her head. "Miss Marple, I am travelling for my health." "A wise precaution," said Dr. Quist. "The mountain air is pure, but the trains are not always punctual." He ordered coffee, black, and opened a slim Morocco notebook. The train climbed. Beyond the windows the fjord narrowed, cliffs rose sheer on either side, and the snow thickened until the glass showed only moving white. The colonel laid down his newspaper. "Damned weather," he said to no one in particular. "Reminds me of the Khyber in '98. Snow there came up to a man's waist." Mrs. Armitage shivered theatrically. "I hope we reach Finse before dark. They say the hotel there is quite civilized." Fru Larsen's needles clicked. "The train stops at Finse if the line is clear. Otherwise, we wait. In Norway, snow is the master." Mr. Dunn looked up from his samples. "Speaking of mastery, Fru Larsen, have you tried Dunn's Alpine Tonic? Fortifies the blood against cold. I could let you have a bottle at cost." Fru Larsen smiled politely and returned to her knitting. Dr. Quist closed his notebook. "Commercial enterprise is admirable," he observed, "provided it does not interfere with scholarship. I myself am bound for the Radium Institute. We have new techniques for tracing arterial blockages. Revolutionary, if the funding materializes." The colonel grunted. "Funding! Everything comes down to money in the end." Miss Marple sipped her tea. It was weak, but the cup was hot. She noticed that Dr. Quist's eyes, pale grey and very bright, rested for a moment on Mrs. Armitage's diamonds, then moved to the colonel's signet ring, then to the scarlet wool in Fru Larsen's lap. Cataloguing, she thought, the way one catalogues symptoms. The train lurched. Cups rattled. Outside, the snow had become a tunnel of white, the rails singing beneath them. The steward announced that dinner would be served at 7, and that owing to the weather the bar would remain open until midnight. Miss Marple finished her tea, folded her napkin into a neat square, and returned to her compartment. As she passed Dr. Quist's table, she caught the faint scent of formalin and Russian leather. In number 5, she drew the curtain, arranged her humbugs within reach, and opened her book on church architecture. But her mind was not on stave churches. It was on the small, precise movements of Dr. Quist's hands as he turned the pages of his notebook. And on the way Fru Larsen's scarlet wool had paused, just for an instant, when the word funding was spoken. The Nordic star pressed on into the gathering dark, and the snow fell without sound, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Chapter 2. The Stop at Finse. The train reached Finse at 6:15, though no one could have told the hour from the sky, which had settled into a uniform pearl grey. Snow lay in smooth, unbroken drifts across the platform, and the station buildings, low red with roofs like upturned boats, looked as though they had been set down by a careful giant and then forgotten. A single lamp burned above the entrance, its light diffused into a hazy halo by the falling flakes. Miss Marple, having changed into a wool dress the colour of heather and a cardigan knitted by her own hands, made her way forward again to the dining car. The air inside was warmer, thick with the scent of herring and boiled potatoes. The passengers had drawn closer together, as people will when the world outside grows hostile. Colonel Armitage stood at the window, hands behind his back, staring out at the whiteness. "Reminds me of the retreat from Kabul," he muttered, "only colder." His wife, seated at their table, was examining a menu with the air of one who suspects the printer of fraud. "They have reindeer steak," she announced. "I suppose one must try the local delicacies, though I draw the line at cloudberries." Fru Larsen had already taken her place. The scarlet knitting lay folded on the tablecloth like a sleeping animal. In its place she had produced a small leather-bound book with gilt edges. Miss Marple, passing, caught sight of the title Norske Folkeeventyr, Norwegian Folk Tales. The widow's lips moved slightly as she read, as though tasting the words. Mr. Dunn bustled in, rubbing his hands. "Bracing, isn't it? Nothing like a spot of snow to put colour in the cheeks. Fru Larsen, I've a new preparation. Dunn's Arctic. Liniment. Rub it on the chest and you'll sleep like a child." He produced a blue bottle from his pocket and set it beside her plate with a flourish. Fru Larsen closed her book. "I sleep very well, thank you. My husband was a sailor. He taught me to take the motion of the sea into any bed." Dr. Quist entered last, coat unbuttoned, a silk scarf at his throat. He bowed to the company in general and took the chair opposite Miss Marple. "The guard informs me we may be here until morning," he said. "Avalanche risk beyond the tunnel. They're sending men with probes, but in this light—" He shrugged, a gesture both elegant and fatalistic. The steward served soup, clear, amber, with fragments of carrot and parsley floating like tiny rafts. Miss Marple ate slowly, observing. Colonel Armitage's moustache drooped over his spoon. His wife dissected her reindeer with the concentration of a surgeon. Fru Larsen broke her bread into precise squares. Mr. Dunn talked ceaselessly between mouthfuls, describing the virtues of his alpine tonic, the testimonials of Arctic explorers, the special discount available to railway employees. Dr. Quist listened with half-closed eyes. When the steward brought coffee, he stirred in 3 lumps of sugar and said, almost to himself, "Sugar is the only pure carbohydrate. Everything else is compromise." Outside the wind rose. Snow hissed against the windows like thrown gravel. The train rocked gently on its springs, tethered to the platform by chains that clinked when the gusts struck. After dinner the passengers drifted to the observation car at the rear. It was a glass-walled box, furnished with basket chairs and a stove that glowed cherry red. A young Norwegian couple played cards in one corner. An elderly Englishman snored behind the Manchester Guardian. The Armitages settled themselves near the stove. Mrs. Armitage produced a pack of patience cards and laid them out with little exclamations of satisfaction or dismay. The Colonel lit a pipe, filling the air with the scent of Latakia. Fru Larsen took a chair by the window. She had resumed her knitting. The scarlet wool grew steadily, though Miss Marple noticed that the stitches were not quite even. Here a dropped one, there a tightness that would pucker the finished garment. Carelessness or deliberate variation. Mr. Dunn circulated with a tray of samples. "Just a sip," he urged the young Norwegian wife. "Sets the blood racing." She laughed and refused, Her husband accepted a thimbleful and pronounced it fiery. Dr. Quist stood apart, hands in pockets, staring out at the storm. The glass reflected his face, pale, sharp, unreadable. Snowflakes struck the pane and melted instantly, running down in crooked rivulets. Miss Marple seated herself in a corner with her library book, but she did not open it. Instead, she watched the reflections in the window. The Colonel's pipe glowing like a small furnace, Mrs. Armitage's diamonds scattering light whenever she moved her head, Fru Larsen's needles flashing in and out of the wool. At 8:30, the guard appeared, snow on his shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen, the line is blocked until dawn at earliest. The hotel at Finse has rooms for those who prefer, but the train is warm and the dining car will serve breakfast at 7. Please do not wander far. Visibility is nil." Mrs. Armitage gave a little shriek. "Rooms! In that dreadful little place? I shall stay here, thank you. At least the sheets are clean." The Colonel knocked out his pipe. "Sensible woman. Bed's a bed. I'll have a whiskey first." Fru Larsen folded her knitting. "I shall post a letter. The mail sack leaves at 9, I believe." She donned a black fur coat and a scarf that covered her mouth, leaving only her eyes visible above the wool. Mr. Dunn offered his arm with a gallant bow. "Allow me to escort you, madam. The platform can be treacherous." Fru Larsen declined with a shake of the head and disappeared through the door. Dr. Quist turned from the window. "A determined lady," he observed. "In my country, we say the mail must go through, even if the bearer freezes." Miss Marple closed her book. "Determination is a useful quality," she said mildly, "provided it is applied to the right object." The stove crackled. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. The young Norwegian couple gathered their cards and departed, laughing. The elderly Englishman woke, blinked, and returned to his newspaper. At 9 o'clock, the guard collected the mail sack from the station office. Fru Larsen returned, cheeks whipped red, snow melting on her lashes. She said nothing, only resumed her seat and her knitting. The Colonel ordered another whiskey. Mrs. Armitage gathered her cards and announced that she would retire. "Come, Henry, you can tell me about Kabul another time." Dr. Quist excused himself soon after. "I have notes to write. The Radium Institute waits for no avalanche." He bowed to Miss Marple. "Good night, madam. May your dreams be warmer than the weather." Mr. Dunn lingered, polishing his samples with a silk handkerchief. "Remarkable man, Dr. Quist," he confided to the empty air. "Heard him lecture in Trondheim last year. Something about radioactive traces in the bloodstream. Revolutionized diagnosis, he says. Needs money, of course. Always does." Miss Marple rose. "Money is the root of many diagnoses," she murmured, and made her way back to her compartment. The corridor was dim, the lamps turned low. Snow pressed against the windows in great soft mounds. She passed number 7, Dr. Quist's compartment, and noticed that the blind was drawn, but a thin line of light showed beneath the door. Voices drifted through the wood, low and urgent. "Absolutely not before Oslo," the Colonel was saying. "The bank must verify. Your signature is verification enough," replied Dr. Quist, calm as winter water. 50,000 kroner, a trifle against the shares you boast of. A pause, the scratch of a pen. Miss Marple continued to number 5. She did not pause again. She had learned long ago that eavesdropping, like knitting, is best done without drawing attention to the needles. In her compartment, she removed her shoes, folded her cardigan, and took a peppermint humbug from the paper bag. The train rocked gently, chained to the earth. Somewhere, a door closed with a soft click. Footsteps passed, measured, unhurried, then silence. She sat for a long time in the dark, listening to the storm. In her mind she reviewed the evening. The uneven knitting, the blue bottle of liniment, the reflection of diamonds in a storm-lit window. Small things apparently disconnected, like the first rose of a pattern that would not reveal itself until the garment was half finished. At 11 o'clock the lamps dimmed further. The stove in the observation car would be banked for the night. The guard would make his rounds. Miss Marple drew the curtain across her window, though there was nothing to see but snow, and lay down fully dressed beneath the travelling rug. Sleep did not come at once. She was remembering a winter in Deinmouth when the sea froze along the breakwater, and how a certain letter posted in haste had contained a forgery that unravelled 3 lives. Snow, she thought, covers a multitude of footprints, but it cannot alter the shape of the boot. Outside, the wind dropped. The mountains held their breath. And somewhere in the locked darkness of the train, a small, precise sound, like the click of a fountain pen signing away a fortune, was swallowed by the night. Chapter 3. The Locked Compartment. The Nordic Star woke to a world of silence. Snow had ceased to fall. It lay in great folds across the line, muffling even the clank of couplings. At 6:30, the steward tapped along the corridor with the discreet authority of a verger, murmuring that coffee would be served in the dining car at 7. Miss Marple rose, performed a modest toilette, and pinned her brooch, a small circle of seed pearls, at the throat of her grey morning dress. She had slept after all, though lightly, the way one sleeps in a house where a door has been left unlatched. The train was still tethered to Finn's platform. Frost flowered the windows. The air in the corridor carried the faint metallic bite of coal smoke from the stove. Number 7 remained closed, blind drawn, no thread of light beneath the door. Miss Marple noticed it only in passing. She was thinking of Fru Larsen's scarlet wool, and whether the dropped stitch had been intentional. In the dining car, the passengers assembled like the pieces of a puzzle, not yet shaken from its box. Colonel Armitage, already in tweeds, buttered toast with military precision. His wife, in a quilted dressing-gown of peach satin, complained that the coffee was stewed. Fru Larsen drank hers black, eyes on the middle distance. Mr. Dunn, freshly shaved and smelling of bay rum, attempted to interest the steward in a packet of Dunn's morning-after powders. Dr. Quist had not appeared. At 7:15, the guard entered cap in hand, snow still clinging to his boots. His face was the colour of putty. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, then stopped, cleared his throat, and began again in careful English. "There is difficulty with Dr. Quist. His compartment is locked from within. No reply to knocking. The conductor has gone for tools." Mrs. Armitage gave a small theatrical gasp. "Locked? But he must be asleep. The man drank only coffee." "Perhaps he is indisposed," said the Colonel. "Mountain air affects some constitutions." Fru Larsen folded her napkin. "Or perhaps he is not asleep." Mr. Dunn looked up sharply. "Dead, you mean? Good heavens!" Miss Marple said nothing. She was counting the rolls in the basket, 7, though only 6 passengers had broken their fast, and wondering why the guard's hands trembled. The conductor returned with a jemmy and a porter, who carried a lantern though the morning was now fully light. They disappeared aft. The dining car waited in a hush, broken only by the clink of a spoon against china. Outside, 2 railway men in fur caps probed the drifts with long iron rods, searching for the buried line. Minutes passed. Then came the scrape of metal on metal, a grunt, the splinter of wood, a silence longer than before. Finally, the guard reappeared, alone. He addressed the company in a voice stripped of ceremony. "Dr. Quist is dead, shot through the head. The Norwegian police have been summoned by radio telephone. Until they arrive, no one is to leave the train." Mrs. Armitage's cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Coffee spread across the white cloth like a dark accusation. The Colonel half rose, then sat again, moustache bristling. Fru Larsen crossed herself, a gesture so swift it might have been the adjustment of a brooch. Mr. Dunn's hand went to his sample case, as though to reassure himself it was still there. Miss Marple finished her coffee. It was cold, but she drank it to the dregs. She had seen death before, violent, sudden, tidily arranged, and recognized the particular stillness that follows the discovery. The train, she thought, had become a very small island in a white sea. The guard led them aft. The corridor smelled of splintered pine and something sharper beneath. Compartment 7 stood open now, the lock hanging like a broken jaw. Inside, the scene was almost domestic. The lower berth made up but unslept in, a leather briefcase on the luggage rack, a pair of polished shoes aligned beneath the window. Dr. Quist lay across the seat, head against the armrest, one arm dangling. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling with the mild surprise of a man who has mislaid his spectacles. A dark, neat hole marred the temple above his left ear. A corresponding mark scarred the upholstery. No blood had reached the carpet. The bullet, Miss Marple noted, had been small. The window was closed, the catch fastened. Frost coated the glass in delicate ferns. The communicating door to number 8, empty, reserved for a party that had failed to join at Bergen, was bolted on both sides. On the folding table lay a single sheet of heavy cream notepaper, the heading of the Grand Hotel, Oslo. In violet ink, a promissory note. "I promise to pay to Dr. Erik Quist, or his order the sum of 50,000 Norwegian kroner upon presentation at the Oslo Handelsbank. On or before the 15th instant H. Armitage." The signature was firm, the loops of the letters generous. Beneath it, in the same violet ink, a second line, "Witnessed F. Dunn." Colonel Armitage stared at the paper as though it were a snake. "Forgery," he said hoarsely. "I signed no such thing. My pen is black." He fumbled in his waistcoat and produced a stub of ebony with a gold band. "There, see for yourselves." Mr. Dunn's face had gone the colour of old parchment. "Nor did I witness anything. I was in my berth by 11. Fru Larsen examined the note without touching it. "The ink is fresh. Hotel notepaper. Anyone might have taken a sheet from the writing desk in the observation car." The guard nodded. "The weapon is missing. We have searched the compartment, the corridor, the lavatories. Nothing." Miss Marple bent closer. The frost on the window interested her. It was undisturbed except for a small circle, no larger than a sixpence, melted clean through at the height of a man's mouth. She touched it with a gloved finger. The glass was cold, but not icy. Someone, she thought, had held a cigarette to the pane from the outside, long enough to clear a peephole. The train had been stationary since 2 o'clock. The corridor window opposite number 7 had been found unlatched, a dusting of snow on the sill. Inspector Dahl arrived at 11, conveyed by Snowcat from the police post at Haugastol. He was a square man with a moustache like a yard brush, and eyes the pale blue of glacier ice. He listened to the guard's report, examined the body, the note, the melted circle, and requested that the passengers remain in the dining car under supervision. "Until the line is cleared," he said, "we are all prisoners of the snow. But murder is an impatient guest. It will not wait for spring." Miss Marple returned to her compartment to fetch her knitting. As she passed number 7, now sealed with a notice in Norwegian and English, she noticed a faint scent lingering in the air, formalin certainly, but beneath it something sweeter, like burnt sugar. She filed it away with the melted circle and the violet ink, small stitches in a pattern not yet visible. In the dining car, the Colonel paced. Mrs. Armitage had recovered sufficiently to demand brandy. Fru Larsen knitted, the scarlet wool growing with mechanical speed. Mr. Dunn sat very still, staring at his hands. Miss Marple took her seat, opened her bag, and drew out a ball of flecked grey wool. She began a sock, heel to be turned later, and let her needles click in quiet counterpoint to the widow's scarlet ones. Outside, the probes rose and fell in the drifts, searching for the iron line beneath. Inside, 5 people waited for the snow to release them, and for the shape of a murderer to emerge from the white silence. Chapter 4. The Discovery. The snowcat's engine had scarcely died away when Inspector Dahl re-entered the dining car, brushing crystals from his coat. He carried a small leather notebook and the air of a man who has measured a room and found it wanting. Behind him, the guard closed the door with the soft finality of a coffin lid. "Fruken Marple," the inspector said, pronouncing the name with care. "You will perhaps assist me. The others have given statements. Yours is missing." Miss Marple laid her knitting in her lap. "I observed little, Inspector. I am an old woman with a taste for peppermint humbugs and warm feet." A flicker of amusement crossed Dahl's face. "Old women see farther than young constables. Begin with dinner," she began. "The soup, the reindeer, the coffee too sweet for English taste. The Colonel's pipe, Mrs. Armitage's diamonds, Fru Larsen's folk tales, Mr. Dunn's liniment, Dr. Quist's 3 lumps of sugar." She spoke without hurry, the way one recounts the plot of a not very interesting novel, yet nothing essential was omitted. When she reached the voices in the corridor, "Not before Oslo. Signature is verification enough." The Colonel's teacup rattled in its saucer. "I went for water," he said loudly. "The dispenser is opposite number 7. I was there 2 minutes, no more." Dahl made a note. "At what hour?" 12:40, give or take. I looked at my watch when I returned to my wife." Mrs. Armitage confirmed it. "We played patience until 1. Henry was never out of my sight longer than it takes to fill a glass." Fru Larsen's needles paused. "I heard footsteps at 12:30. They stopped outside number 7. Then a sound, soft, like a cork drawn under a napkin." Mr. Dunn cleared his throat. "I take a powder for my nerves. I was awake. I saw the Colonel in the corridor at 12:40, returning to his compartment." The Colonel flushed. "I told you. Water." Dahl turned to Miss Marple. "And you, Fröken? I retired at 11. I heard the Colonel's voice earlier, about the bank in Oslo. Later, footsteps, a door closing. Then nothing until the train stopped at 2. Dahl closed his notebook. "The train stopped at 2. The corridor window opposite number 7 was found open a hand's breadth, snow on the sill. The compartment door was locked from within, the key on the inside. The communicating door bolted on both sides, yet Dr. Quist was shot with a small caliber bullet that entered here." He touched his own temple. and lodged in the upholstery. No! Weapon. No exit wound on the far side of the head. The angle is downward, as though the murderer stood above him. Mrs. Armitage gave a strangled cry. Above him? But the window is at shoulder height. Exactly, said Dahl. The window was closed and frosted, yet there is a melted circle the size of a coin. Someone held a cigarette to the glass from the corridor side, long enough to see inside. The train was stationary, the snow-muffled sound. The murderer opened the corridor window, reached in, fired, closed the window, and walked away. The colonel exploded. Impossible! The door was locked from within. How did he enter to plant that damned note? He did not need to enter, said Dahl. The note was written elsewhere, on hotel paper, in violet ink, and slipped under the door after the shot. The lock was engaged by Dr. Quist himself when he retired. The murderer needed only a clear view and a steady hand. Mr. Dunn's voice was thin, but the communicating door to number 8. Number 8 is empty. The bolt on the number 7 side was drawn after death. Observe. Dahl produced a photograph taken by the police surgeon. The bolt thrown, but a smear of blood on the brass. Quist's own, transferred when the murderer reached across the body to secure the illusion of a locked room. Miss Marple picked up her knitting again. The promissory note is clever. It points to motive. Blackmail, perhaps, and to Colonel Armitage. The violet ink is meant to be noticed. A man who signs with black would not choose violet unless he wished to be caught. Dahl nodded. The ink is fresh. The paper comes from the writing desk in the observation car. Anyone could have taken a sheet. The pen, he produced a small glass tube containing a fountain pen. The barrel violet enamel was found in the snow beneath the corridor window. It matches the ink exactly. The cap bears the initials FD. Mr. Dunn rose so quickly his chair overturned. That is mine! I lost it yesterday. Left it on the table when I went to the lavatory. Convenient, said Dahl. We also found this. He laid a .22 pistol on the table, wrapped in oilskin. 1 round fired, wrapped in a handkerchief monogrammed FD, hidden in your sample case beneath bottles of Alpine tonic. Dunn's face crumpled. I swear. Save it for the court, said Dahl. You will be detained. The colonel stared at the pistol as though it might bite. Mrs. Armitage began to cry quietly into her lace handkerchief. Fru Larsen knitted on, the scarlet wool now long enough to wind twice around her throat. Miss Marple spoke softly. There is one more thing, Inspector. The melted circle. A cigarette leaves ash. Where is it? Dahl's eyes narrowed. In the snow on the sill. A stub of Turkish cigarette. Gold band. The brand sold in the observation car. Dr. Quist smoked cigars. The colonel, a pipe. Fru Larsen, nothing. Mrs. Armitage, Egyptian. Mr. Dunn, he turned to the commercial traveller. You smoke Turkish cigarettes. We found the packet in your coat pocket. One missing. Dunn opened his mouth, closed it again. The dining car was very quiet. Miss Marple continued, almost to herself. Dr. Quist was alive when the train stopped at 2. The guard checked the doors then. Number 7 answered. The shot came later, between 2 and dawn. The murderer waited until the train was still, the passengers asleep. He used the cigarette to clear the frost, opened the window, fired through the gap. The angle is perfect if one stands on the step outside. Then he closed the window, dropped the pen to implicate himself, too obviously perhaps, and returned to his berth. Dahl looked at her with new respect. You have the eye of a marksman, Fruken. I have the eye of a knitter, she said. One learns to see where the thread goes. The inspector gathered his evidence. Mr. Dunn, you will come with me. The snowcat returns to Haugestul. The rest of you will remain until the line is cleared. As Dunn was led away, manacles glinting, Mrs. Armitage whispered, But the note, 50,000 kroner, will be returned to you, said Dahl. Forged, but harmless now. Fru Larsen's needles clicked once, twice. The scarlet wool had become a scarf, long and narrow. Miss Marple noticed that the uneven stitches formed a pattern after all, a series of tiny nooses. Outside, the probes had reached the rails. A whistle sounded, thin and triumphant. The Nordic star stirred, chains rattling, the mountains, white and implacable, began to slide past the windows once more. Miss Marple resumed her sock. The heel was turned, the decreases began. In the quiet, she heard again the small sounds of the night. The click of a pen, the pop of a cork, the soft exhalation of breath against glass, and knew that the pattern was complete. Chapter 5. The Passengers Speak. The dining car had become a courtroom without robes or wigs. A single lamp burned above the table, throwing long shadows across the white cloth. Inspector Dahl sat at the head, notebook open, pencil poised like a miniature bayonet. The guard stood behind him, arms folded, a silent reminder that the train remained a prison. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft and relentless, erasing the tracks of the snowcat that had carried Mr. Dunn away. Colonel Armitage was summoned first. He entered with the stiff gait of a man marching to a court-martial, placed his cap on a chair, and remained standing. "Name and occupation," Dahl began. "Henry Armitage, Colonel, retired, Indian Army, resident of Cheltenham." "You knew the deceased?" "Met him yesterday in Bergen. Fellow passenger, nothing more." Dahl consulted his notes. "Yet at 12:40 you were seen outside his compartment." The Colonel's moustache bristled. "I told you, water. The dispenser is opposite number 7. I filled a glass, returned to my wife. 2 minutes, no more. Your wife confirms you played patience until 1. Did you discuss Dr. Quist?" "Discussed the weather, the reindeer, the price of whiskey. Quist was mentioned, said he was bound for the Radium Institute. Needed funds. I said nothing about money." Dahl produced the promissory note in its glass-eyed envelope. "This bears your signature, violet ink. Forgery. My pen is black." The Colonel drew it from his waistcoat. Ebony, gold band, the nib still faintly blue. "There, examine it." Dahl did, then laid the note aside. "You own shares in Swedish Steel?" "Some. My wife's inheritance. They have fallen lately. Nothing to do with Quist." "Thank you, Colonel. You may sit." Mrs. Armitage followed, trembling, clutching a lace handkerchief as though it were a life-belt. She confirmed the patience game, the water, the Colonel's return. He was never gone long enough to do anything dreadful. "Were you awake all night?" "I dozed. The train rocks one so." "Did you hear a shot?" "Nothing. Only the wind." Fru Larsen entered next. She had left her knitting in her compartment. Her hands, Miss Marple noted, were square and capable, the nails cut short. "You heard footsteps at 12:30, Dahl said. "Yes, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside number 7. Then a sound, pfft, like a glove dropped on snow." "You looked out?" "My blind was down. I did not rise. My husband taught me never to interfere in men's quarrels." "Quarrels?" "Voices earlier. The Colonel and Dr. Quist, about money. The Colonel said, 'Not a krone until Oslo.'" Dr. Quist laughed. He had a cold laugh. Dahl made a note. You posted a letter at 9. To my nephew in Tromsø. He expects news of my health. You smoke? Never. My lungs are delicate. She was dismissed. Mr. Dunn had already been removed. His statement, taken in the Snowcat, was read aloud by the guard. I, Felix Dunn, commercial traveller, deny all knowledge of the pistol or the note. I lost my violet pen in the observation car. I smoke Turkish cigarettes, one after dinner, no more. I was awake at 12:40 and saw Colonel Armitage in the corridor. I took a powder at 1 and slept. Dahl closed the book. The passengers have spoken. The facts remain. A locked compartment, a forged note, a pistol in Mr. Dunn's possession, a cigarette stub in the snow. Yet something is missing. Miss Marple had been knitting throughout. A plain stocking in serviceable grey. She laid it down. The motive inspector. Mr. Dunn sells patent medicines. Dr. Quist sought funds for his institute. A promissory note for 50,000 kroner is large, but not large enough to murder for, unless it was meant to fail. Dahl's eyes narrowed. Explain. Dr. Quist carried insurance. A policy for 100,000 kroner, payable to the Radium Institute on his death. Mr. Dunn visited the institute last month, posing as a patient with heart trouble. He sold them a course of Dunn's cardiac elixir. The policy was taken out the same week. If Dr. Quist died violently, the institute would pay its debts, and Mr. Dunn's commission. The colonel whistled softly. Mrs. Armitage pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Dahl turned the page. We telephoned Oslo. The policy exists. Beneficiary, the institute. Mr. Dunn is named agent. The premium was paid in cash by Dr. Quist himself. Fru Larsen spoke for the first time since her testimony. Then Dr. Quist planned his own death? No, said Miss Marple. He planned a fraud. The promissory note was genuine, signed under duress in the corridor. Mr. Dunn forged the witness line later. The plan was to accuse the colonel of murder when the note was presented and refused. The colonel would pay to avoid scandal. Dr. Quist would share the money with Mr. Dunn, but Mr. Dunn grew greedy. He shot Dr. Quist, planted the note, and trusted the locked room to shield him. Dahl nodded slowly. The melted circle. Mr. Dunn held his cigarette to the glass to watch Dr. Quist write. The train was stopped, the corridor empty. He opened the window, fired, closed it. The pen was dropped deliberately, too obviously his own. He believed we would arrest the colonel and release him for lack of evidence. Mrs. Armitage found her voice. But the communicating door, the bolt, drawn after death, said Dahl. Mr. Dunn entered with a duplicate key, stolen from the guard's bunch, while he slept in the observation car. He locked the door from within, bolted the communicating door, and left by number 8, which opens onto the same corridor. The key he returned before morning. Miss Marple picked up her knitting. The scarf Fru Larsen knits is long enough to muffle a small pistol, but she did not use it. She heard, she waited, she posted her letter. The letter will tell her nephew that the danger is past. Fru Larsen met Miss Marple's mild gaze. My nephew is a solicitor. He advised me to travel, to observe. Dr. Quist ruined my husband's cousin with false promises of radium cures. I came to watch, not to kill. Dahl closed his notebook. Then justice is served without your needles, Fru. The case is complete. The train lurched. Chains clanked. Steam hissed. The line was clear. The Nordic Star began to move, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. Oslo lay ahead, and beyond it, the wide world where snow melted and secrets thawed. Miss Marple turned the heel of her sock. One more decrease, and the foot would begin. She thought of Mr. Dunn in his manacles, of Dr. Quist's surprised eyes, of the small, neat hole that had ended a clever scheme. Outside, the mountains slid past, white and serene, keeping their own counsel. Chapter 6. The Solution in the Snow. The Nordic Star had been crawling for an hour through a tunnel of white when Inspector Dahl returned to the dining car. The lamps were lit against the early dark. The stove glowed. The air carried the faint, comforting smell of pea soup. The passengers sat as before, Colonel and Mrs. Armitage at one table, Fru Larsen opposite Miss Marple. The empty place where Mr. Dunn had been now occupied by the guard's notebook and a sealed evidence bag. Dahl laid a fresh sheet of paper on the cloth. "Before Oslo," he said, "the record must be complete. Fruken Marple, you have the floor." Miss Marple folded her knitting. The grey sock was finished to the cuff. Only the ribbing remained. She spoke in the gentle, precise tone she might have used to explain a dropped stitch to a beginner. "The murder was planned in 3 acts," she began. "Act 1, the quarrel. Dr. Quist needed money for his institute. He learned from the passenger list that Colonel Armitage carried shares in Swedish steel, shares that had fallen but were still valuable. In Bergen, he cultivated the colonel, spoke of mutual investments, hinted at a loan. The colonel refused. Quist then threatened exposure of an old matter, perhaps a debt from the colonel's Indian days, perhaps something concerning Mrs. Armitage's first marriage. The colonel agreed to sign a promissory note, but only in Oslo, at the bank. Act 2, the corridor. At 12:40, the train was still moving slowly. The colonel left his wife, went to the dispenser, filled his glass. Dr. Quist was waiting. He produced the note, already written in violet ink on hotel paper stolen earlier. The colonel signed under protest. Mr. Dunn, unable to sleep, watched from his doorway and saw the transaction. He saw opportunity. Act 3, the snow. The train stopped at 2. The guard made his round. Dr. Quist answered, locked his door, drew his blind. He believed the matter closed. Mr. Dunn did not. He had visited the institute, knew of the insurance policy, knew the clinic was bankrupt. 50,000 kroner from the colonel was useful. 100,000 from the insurance was a fortune. He waited until the train was silent, the passengers asleep. He took his pistol. Small, silent, with the scarf Fru Larsen had knitted as a sample for the observation car shop. He went to the corridor window opposite number 7. The train was stationary. The platform lights were off. Snow muffled every sound. He lit a Turkish cigarette, held it to the frosted glass until a peephole melted. He saw Dr. Quist reading in the berth, coat off, braces showing. He opened the corridor window, 6 inches only, enough for the muzzle. He fired once. The scarf swallowed the report. Dr. Quist fell back. The bullet lodged in the upholstery. Mr. Dunn closed the window, dropped the violet pen into the snow to implicate himself too obviously, knowing the colonel's black pen would contradict it. He entered number 7 with the duplicate key, slipped the signed note under the blind to be found later, drew the bolt on the communicating door, and left by number 8. He returned, the key to the guard's bunch while the man dozed. By dawn he was asleep, dreaming of commissions. Colonel Armitage cleared his throat. But the note was witnessed F. Dunn. "A flourish," said Miss Marple, "added after death, in the same violet ink. The original bore only the colonel's signature." Mr. Dunn thought the witness line would confuse us. Mrs. Armitage whispered, "And the insurance?" Dr. Quist took out the policy himself. believing the Institute would profit by his natural death. He did not foresee a bullet. Fru Larsen laid her scarlet scarf on the table. It was finished, the ends fringed with tiny tassels. "I knitted this for the shop," she said. "Mr. Dunn asked to borrow it to demonstrate the wool. I refused. He took it anyway while I posted my letter. I noticed the missing length this morning." Dahl opened the evidence bag. Inside lay the pistol, wrapped in scarlet wool. A single strand of grey hair, Dr. Quist's, clung to the fringe. "The scarf muffled the shot," Dahl said. "Fibres match. The pistol is registered to Mr. Dunn, bought in Trondheim for protection against wolves." The train whistle sounded, long and mournful. Oslo lights glimmered ahead, yellow against the snow. Miss Marple resumed her knitting. "One more thing, Inspector. The melted circle. A cigarette leaves ash, but also heat. The glass was warm to the touch at dawn. Mr. Dunn held it there longer than necessary, watching to be certain Dr. Quist was dead." Dahl closed his notebook. "The case is closed. Mr. Dunn will be met at the station. The Colonel's note will be returned. The insurance voided. Fru Larsen, your scarf is evidence, but you shall have it back when the trial is over." Fru Larsen smiled, the first real smile Miss Marple had seen from her. "Keep it, Inspector. Scarlet is too bright for morning." The Nordic Star slowed, brakes sighing. Platforms, porters, the smell of coal and coffee drifted through the vents. Miss Marple gathered her belongings, book, humbugs, the finished sock. She paused at the door. "Snow covers many things," she said, "but it cannot hide the shape of the truth." Outside, the mountains stood white and silent, keeping their ancient secrets. The train stopped with a gentle shudder, and the passengers stepped down into the clearing night. Chapter 7. The Train Moves. On the platform at Oslo Central Station was a long rectangle of yellow light and hurrying figures. Porters in blue caps wheeled luggage. A brass band played a jaunty march that sounded thin against the cold. Steam from the Nordic Star hung in the air like a departing soul. Miss Marple descended the steps with the careful dignity of one who has learned that railway carriages are not always steady, and found Inspector Dahl waiting with 2 constables. "Mr. Dunn is in custody," he said. "He has confessed everything but the insurance fraud, that he still calls a misunderstanding. The scarf is catalogued. The pistol ballistics match. You will be needed for the inquest, Fruken, but not tonight." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Tonight I should like a bath and a proper cup of tea." Colonel Armitage appeared behind her, hat in hand. "Miss Marple, my wife and I are in your debt. If ever you visit Cheltenham, you're very kind," she said, "but I seldom travel farther than the circulating library." Mrs. Armitage pressed a small velvet box into her hand. "A token. The clasp was loose. I had it mended in Bergen." Inside lay a brooch, seed pearls in the shape of a snowflake. Miss Marple thanked her gravely and pinned it beside her own. Fru Larsen was last. She carried no luggage but a small black portmanteau and the scarlet scarf, now returned, folded over her arm. "My nephew meets me," she said. "He will take me to the fjords. Snow is cleaner there." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "My cousin's name was Lars. He died believing radium would save him. Thank you for giving him justice." Miss Marple touched the widow's gloved hand. "Justice is a slow knitter, but the pattern comes right in the end." The band struck up a new tune. The Armitages were swept away by a porter. Fru Larsen vanished into the crowd. Inspector Dahl offered his arm as far as the taxi rank. You will stay at the Grand? For one night? My nephew has booked me on the morning steamer to Newcastle. Then I bid you God nat. The Norwegian Railways owe you a lifetime pass. Miss Marple smiled. I prefer the quiet of third class, and a window that opens. She settled into the taxi, the brooch catching the street lamps as they glided through the city. Oslo was all clean lines and electric light. Snow lay in neat piles along the gutters, already turning to slush. At the hotel, she was shown to a room overlooking the harbour. A samovar steamed on the table. A plate of sankaka waited beside it. She ate too, drank her tea strong and milkless, and ran a bath scented with pine. Later, wrapped in a dressing gown the colour of oatmeal, she sat by the window and wrote a postcard to her nephew Raymond. The mountains are magnificent, the company instructive. I have finished one sock and begun its mate. Home by Tuesday. Do not meet me. The bus from Danemouth is reliable. Your affectionate Aunt Jane. She added a postscript. Tell the vicar's wife the price of coal will fall by spring. The harbour lights winked across the water. Somewhere a ship's bell sounded 8 times. Miss Marple closed the curtain, turned off the lamp, and slept without dreaming. At dawn, the coastal steamer Stella Polaris cast off. Miss Marple stood on deck in her tweed coat and sensible hat, watching Norway slide astern. The fjords were iron grey, under a pale sky. Gulls wheeled above the wake. She opened her knitting bag, took out the second sock, and began the ribbing. 2 plain, 2 pearl, the rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Behind her, the mountains kept their white silence. Ahead lay the open sea, and beyond it the familiar hedges of Dunmouth, the circulating library, the quiet certainties of home. She thought of Mr. Dunn in his cell, of Dr. Quist in his coffin, of Fru Larsen knitting something softer now, perhaps a shawl for her nephew's child. Small threads, she reflected, woven into the great pattern of human folly and redemption. The Stella Polaris gathered speed. Spray stung her cheeks. The wind carried the clean salt smell of freedom. Miss Marple finished the ribbing, cast off, and tucked the pair of socks into tissue paper. A gift, she decided, for the porter who had carried her suitcase in Bergen. Warm feet, after all, were the beginning of contentment. The coast of Norway dwindled to a thin white line, then vanished. Miss Marple went below to the saloon, ordered a pot of tea, and opened her library book at the chapter on stave churches. Outside, the North Sea rolled grey and endless, carrying her gently home.